People who have gone out for a pack of cigarettes and never went back to your family. What happened after you left? Serious.
Asterisk asterisk attention. Serious. Tag notice asterisk 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 jokes, puns, and off-topic comments are not permitted in asterisk any asterisk comment. Parent or child. Asterisk parent comments that aren't from the target group will be removed, along with their child replies. Asterisk report comments that violate these rules. Posts that have few relevant answers within the first hour. And posts that are not appropriate for the serious tag will be removed. Consider doing an ARMA request instead. Thanks for your cooperation and enjoy the discussion. Asterisk I am a bot, and this action was performed automatically. Please contact the moderators of this subreddit. Message compose to =r@AskReddit if you have any questions or concerns.
My real dad ghosted like 4 families. His first family, he had a son. He was in that family for 13 years. His son had a motorcycle wreck and ended up in intensive care. A year later he ghosted that family and moved to a new state. Just up and left, didn't take anything but his clothes and his car. And #X200B, second family, he had a daughter. He left almost immediately. And #X200B. Then he moved to another state. And married another woman. And had 2 more kids whom I've never met or spoken to. Don't even know their names. TBH. Jake, John, Jordan, Josh, something with a J. He went out for a pack of smokes and never went back. His own words. And #X200B. Then he met my mum. And had my sister first. He ghosted my mum 2 years later, then showed up for some quick whoopee, and I happened. He ghosted her, but didn't leave the state. She called the cops and my first memory is of the cops bringing my dad to the house in cuffs and letting him go, only for him to attack my mum while she was holding me and she dropped me. Then the cops arrested him. Monsieur. He wanted out, he got out. And #X200B. He had 2 more marriages, but no kids. It's his mode to shack up with well-off women and mooch until they either kick him out or he gets bored. And #X200B. It's really fucking painful to see. Because I want to be an ass-wiping dad who's there for his kids every fucking second of their lives. I want to be the exact opposite of him, monsieur.
This is my throwaway. And #X200B. Got married right out of high school. Everything was going well, but we were young and both were our first partners. Came home early one day and walked in on my wife with another man. Standard insanity ensued, followed by her begging for forgiveness, and we went to months of counseling. Everything seemed well and dandy. She seemed like a totally different woman and couldn't live without me. And #X200B. One day I log into our desktop PC and her Facebook is loaded and there are multiple messages and I had to look. I found exactly what I knew I would find. It crushed me, but I acted like nothing happened. That weekend I packed up my favorite clothes and belongings that meant a lot to me and snuck them to the car. Sunday evening I said, "Hey, I'm going to take the dogs to the dog park and hike for a few hours." When I left, I texted our neighbor to see if anyone showed up at the house. She replied pretty quickly that a male visitor was by very quickly. I told her goodbye and the dogs and I just drove. I had a decent savings and thought, fuck it, start off somewhere new, and that is what I did. And #X200B, my ex-wife didn't even try and contact me until around lunchtime the next day. When I didn't respond, she blew me up with photos and videos of her with multiple men and about how bad of a lover I was. It fucked me up, but I just kept trucking. I ended up in a smaller town where I saw someone was hiring for my trade. Years later, I remarried to the best human ever. And #X200B, I went home not long ago and my mom posted a picture of us at a gathering. My ex hit up my Facebook and asked if we could meet for a cup of coffee. She would like some closure. I obviously would like as well. I have to say, for all the resentment and hatred I had toward this woman, our conversation was pleasant and I felt better after we talked. She understood why I left. She apologized deeply, many times, and didn't try to blame me for anything. And #X200B. After an hour and a little bit of tears, awkward as hell in public, ha ha ha, she asked if it was okay to get a hug. We hugged and said our goodbyes. Once I got home, I told my wife about the visit and she got awkward for a few minutes. She left the room and I didn't follow. I thought, oh, I'm sleeping on the couch tonight. 5 minutes later, she came back crying and just gave me the biggest hug ever. She told me she forgot what I went through and she was sorry and glad our life is good. And #X200B, closing, I left a terrible human for the best human ever. And #X200B, edit, this blew up. I would like to thank everyone for their kind words. And #X200B, 1. I love those dogs more than most of my family. Sadly, they have passed old age, and I can't wait to see them again, but thank you for the kind words. And #X200B, 2. Yes, we got divorced. It was a pretty quick and painless process. My best friend growing up ended up being a divorce lawyer. When I took off, I called him and provided him with the photo, video evidence. It was a pretty simple process after that.
When I was 18, I moved out from my abusive father. I was commuting to college at the time and I had morning classes, so the night before I packed my car with as much of my stuff as I could and set off. One of my professors that I regularly talked to after class noticed that my car was full of clothes and asked if everything was okay. Over lunch I explained my situation, and he offered to take me in. I had already made arrangements to live with my mother. After my classes for the day were over, I went home for the first time since I was a child to live with my mother. I slept on the couch for months before getting my own bed. And we did always have the money to eat. But we made it work. I have seen my father one time since then because he swore to me that he had changed. That night he proceeded to get wasted and tried to put his hands on me. I haven't seen him since, and I have no regrets. I didn't go out for cigarettes, but I pulled a similar stunt. My mom is abusive and I had no spine. So I told her I was going to move in with my dad for the summer. I said I would be back before the end of August. After I moved in with my dad, I got my state ID. My mom didn't want me to have any kind of ID. And I finally got my driver's permit a few weeks later. I felt bad for lying at the time. But now I'll know if I didn't lie to her, I would have never gotten out of there. I would be stuck living on a shitty little hobby farm with a woman who did everything in her power to tear me down and hurt me.
My ex-husband was extremely physically and emotionally abusive, as well as an alcoholic addict. He obsessively controlled the money and every second of my daily routine. An unplanned 5-minute delay to get gas on the way home would result in a dressing down if I was lucky, a beating if I wasn't. We had 3 daughters, and on the few occasions I threatened to leave, he'd tell me to go ahead and leave. But I couldn't take our daughters with me. At one of our couple friends' wedding reception, he got drunk as per usual and lost his mind over something insignificant. Dragged me around in the street by my hair, and pulled a gun on me in front of the wedding party. One of his friends, who was a real POS, took me aside while the groom's mom was driving my ex home. and told me, "You don't have to live like this." It was like a light went on in my mind. This guy says I don't have to live like this. It took me a couple of weeks to put a plan in place. But one morning after my ex left for work, my dad helped me pack everything that would fit in a Ohio. And I GTFO. I'd like to say I never saw him again after that day. But I was pretty lucky. He decided to leave me alone after an initial period of stalking and about in jail for violating an order of protection. Fast forward 15 years, and I finished undergrad, law school, and postdoc. I'm remarried with 2 more amazing kids, and life is pretty much goals. Edit. I forgot to mention the kids. I did take them with me. That was why I left the way I did, since I knew he wouldn't let me leave with him otherwise. Unfortunately, it's not been all sunshine and rainbows since. Although we had some pretty wonderful times over the years, my ex passed on to the girls a genetic predisposition to serious mental illness, and I lost one daughter to suicide when she was 14. We all were, and are, pretty traumatized. But we cope the best we can and try to appreciate all the other wonderful things life has brought us. Edit 2. Thanks for the gold, and for the positive comments. All this isn't something I talk about much in my D2D. It's been years, but a lot of it is still fresh, and it's occasionally cathartic to open up to strangers.
I was 10 years old when my mum and dad split up. We had been expecting it, but I didn't know that my mum had packed up suitcases for herself, my sister, and I. One day we went to school like everything was normal, and went to my mum's parents after school. It wasn't unusual for us to have dinner there, but then mum sat us down and told us we'd be staying there for a while. Ended up being 6 years before we got our own place. I never got to go back to my bedroom again. My dad got remarried and his wife's daughter moved in and repainted my room monsieur. When I had to visit them, I slept on the couch while she slept in my room monsieur. Growing up, my mother was pretty abusive, mostly emotional, to me and my little sister. This included basically fabricating a false reality that my dad had divorced my mother and left her penniless, then left the state, as well as isolating us from other family members on the basis that they were bad people. Probably the worst thing she did, which I still deal with today, was turning me and my little sister against each other in these fucked up scenarios. Basically, her drug and or alcohol-induced rage of the day would always fall on one of us. However, whoever told on the other sibling that they did something to anger my mother would face her wrath, and the other sibling would have a brief respite. This went on since I was 8 or so. I grew up hating my sister. After I got older, I found my best friend in high school, and he helped me understand just how fucked up my situation was, given that I assumed that's how family life was since we were so isolated. No TV or internet. And that my mother was also a teacher at both my elementary and middle school. She had control over everything. At 18, I left my house and moved in with my friend. However, it wasn't forever. He was joining the army at the end of school and I had to think of someone to stay with. So I found my dad, states away. I took a long shot and asked him if I could stay with him, monsieur. He accepted. I got everything I owned in the world, which fit in a truck bed, and while most kids were going off to college, I was going to start over in a completely different place with a father I didn't know. It turned out my dad was a decent guy. He wasn't a saint by any means, but leagues better than my mother. He helped me get a driver's license and eventually helped me join the military, where I have just finished my first year in. I haven't seen my little sis in 2 years though, and she still hates me. Even though SHES18 she hasn't left her mother, and since I left SHES become closer with her. I regret not trying harder to be there for her every day. But as for my life now, I have 3 years left in the military, then I hope to go to college and become a pilot. None of which I ever thought of when I was living under my mother's roof. Edit. Holy fuck. This blew up so much from what I expected initially. Thanks so much for everyone's kind words and advice. Just knowing that other people are out there rooting for me has lifted my spirits so much, and now I really have to make it, ha ha ha. Edit number 2. Thank you so much for the gold and silver, you beautiful bastards.
My best friend walked out on his family. He had a wife and a 4-year-old daughter. He literally used the cigarettes line. Nobody knows why he really left. His excuses over the years included anxiety, spiritual crisis, aka God told me they were evil, an overwhelming lust for Asian penises, the booze, and symptoms of a stomach complaint. My mom just all of the sudden wasn't there anymore. She and my dad were miserable, but my dad wouldn't agree to divorce. He was a minister at a big church and didn't believe divorce was right, and so instead he tried to stay married to my mom, all while avoiding her and all the unhappiness at home. She never really left her bedroom, monsieur. She was miserable and she made everyone else miserable, too. She was horrible to me in those last few years. We had been really close before that. She started moving stuff out of the house little by little when no one was home. Like, one day a bookshelf would be gone. And we'd all notice but just kind of go on with our lives. And it bothers me very, very much. But her moving out was so abrupt and so ambiguous that I don't remember specifics about it. Like, I don't know if it was during the school year or over summer. I don't know where I was or what was different when I came home that day, but at some point, she didn't live there anymore. I was 14. My dad told me that God told him she would never come back. I looked up to my dad a lot. He was kind of on the same level as God in my mind, so I believed him, monsieur. He soon after started dating another woman, secretly, because the church didn't know he was divorced yet. He intended to marry her as soon as possible. I remember I had to pose for family photos with this new woman and her 2 kids. They were printed up and put into a frame and hung over our fireplace. Then one day, my mom came to the house. She told me she had made the biggest mistake of her life. That she loved me, and my brother and my dad. And she wanted to work everything out. I guess God was wrong when he spoke to my dad. Then she walked out of my room and saw the new family portrait over the fireplace. She left quickly. A few days later, she called the house. My dad answered, and she told him to tell the kids I said goodbye. Then she hung up. We started calling everyone we could think to call. We tried to call the phone operator, asking if they could trace the call. This was 1995, so no caller ID or cell phone with a callback number. A bit later that night, my new stepmom-to-be came over and pulled my dad aside. She saw a car at the end of our neighborhood that looked like my mom's. My dad called 911. Everyone showed up. My mom had taken a bucket of pills. She was barely alive. They took her to the ER and pumped her stomach and intubated her. They told my dad to call my brother so he could come say his goodbyes too. I was let into the room for a while. I looked at the machines and they were plugged into the wall, and I stared for a long time thinking I should unplug it because she really didn't want to be revived, and I couldn't understand why we were doing all of this. But then a nurse came in and said I had to leave while they did stuff. My mom survived. My dad married the other lady. I think this messed me up and I honestly can't believe I've typed up this entire recollection. I don't think about it very often and maybe that's why I can't remember the details of the day I realized she'd moved out. TL. Doctor, don't move out and leave your family without so much as a note. And don't tell people God told you stuff.
When I was 16, I moved out without telling my stepdad, but my mum was in on it. And I just moved in with my grandparents. I left on a Friday. Got all my stuff in just 2 trips. I was told he didn't even notice I was gone the first weekend. He was pretty mad once he figured it out, but it was all mostly a non-event. Everything turned out okay for me. It will have been 21 years this September. Oh, I can answer this. Sort of. Simply put, I don't know. I don't contact him anymore. When I was in the 3rd grade, my father left. Simply stopped coming home at night, leaving my mother devastated. And my other siblings, half-siblings, from my mother's previous marriage, left for college or other things entirely. My mother became mentally vacant, and stopped caring altogether besides putting out food during the evenings. We rarely communicated. When I left for college, one of my sisters agreed to pay for a phone for me so I could keep contact with the rest of my family. My mother lost the house, which, for the better part of my childhood, didn't have heat. I didn't have new clothes, or really anything, due to some pipes breaking in winter early on. We didn't have running water to the only bathroom with a shower. I bathed by dumping gallon buckets of water on my head, but they were ice cold, even in the winter. It was in Pennsylvania. My house was regularly below freezing. To describe my life during those years as hell is forgiving. I didn't realize how much was wrong at the time. When my sister abruptly cut me off from her phone plan while I was in college, I considered reaching out, but I didn't. That was about 8 years ago. I found my own place. I graduated from college with some struggles in the summers. They've reached out. I never reached back. I think my mother lives several states away now, but my family never cared about me, and I don't really care about them either. I don't know what they think. I don't know what they expected out of me, if anything, and I don't know what they were thinking when I grew up. I've got a job that probably qualifies as more successful than either of my parents, and I don't really feel any obligation to them at all, which is a blessing in a way. But I feel kinda weird explaining that situation to others, and I don't really know how to interact with family members of other people because I just never had that kind of relationship with anyone. It's bizarre in its own way, but that's about as well as I can respond off the top of my head.
For us, it was that he went out for milk. Dad told me as the eldest surviving kid I was the man of the house until he got back. So it was my obligation to help, defend, take care of them for him until he came back. He never came back. Didn't leave my wife and kids as I don't have any, but I did walk out on my mother and siblings without any notice. Dad was not in the picture. After best decision of my life. My mother refuses treatment for her very serious mental illness or illnesses and was incredibly abusive physically as well and neglectful while I was growing up. I saw the effect it had: burn out older siblings with no motive or drive and instead embraced the crazy just to feel sane in the toxic family home we lived in. I was homeless for about a year and a half, living out of a duffel and bumming food from friends. I feel like my life hasn't even started until I left it behind. I feel like it held me back for 17 years and I now am finally being able to find out who I am. Mum never came looking for me. I reconnected with my estranged father, whom I learned was in the military from the moment he was 18 until he was HD at 43.
He has severe PTSD from his 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's now getting his master's in outdoors leadership, which I believe is a perfect way to use his massive skill set.
I hadn't started a family of my own yet, but I was engaged to my ex, who I just ended up ghosting after a few years. It was several years ago and he had to move back to Tokyo for his job. We met in the US while he was an expat, so he asked me to come live with him this year. Moved, met the family, all that stuff. Then, one day I came down with the flu and was miserable and was so weak I couldn't even walk myself to the toilet. He was trying to come on to me several times that day and I kept refusing because of obvious reasons. Then I was in the middle of sleeping and he started to take off my clothes and have sex with me while I was sleeping after already refusing it to him this year. I woke up and was like WTF and made him stop. Then I pretended to be asleep till he left for work the next morning, packed my shit, and left. Dropped the key off at concierge and hurried out of that building in a huge panic. Never spoke to him again. Cut off all contact immediately. I booked hotels for a couple of weeks and met my, now, husband. Edit. Wohoa, I didn't see the platinum coming. Thank you for that. And thanks everyone for all the supportive comments. Mine was, I'm going to the gas station. I'm in an interfaith and interracial relationship, and my family never ever accepted it. It escalated to physical violence and I needed to make an exit. I let my mom know I wanted to marry him. She told me I could stay and be less than the dirt under her shoe, or I could go. I left. It's been 3 years. I went back once to get my clothes, but haven't been back. It's been super trying. They still have some contact with me, but refuse to accept my one and only boundary. Show me that you can even fucking acknowledge my fiancé, and then we can start rebuilding. Ultimately, I had to walk away from a place where I was being punished for not doing my duty as a daughter, which is putting my happiness second to the respect of the family name. This was the first time in my life I ever truly wanted something just for me, and they couldn't handle it. So now, they're stuck in a place where I'm the bad guy, and I'll always be the bad guy. Because to them I should be falling over myself to get my moms to forgive me, and I just don't. It's really opened my eyes to how toxic my family actually is, and how conservatively I was being raised. My biggest sadness is that my brothers, who I love very dearly, cannot fathom going against my monsieur. But I'm a better and healthier person now, and I would never go back. Even if you told me I would love a normal life with all of my family talking to me.
My great-grandfather went out for cigarettes and milk and never came home. Him and his family had just moved to the States from Poland. It was him, his wife, and 4 children. Not sure how my great-grandma felt, obviously, but she basically worked multiple jobs without knowing English to feed the family and keep the house. When her children grew older, they all worked to contribute. I have so much respect from her. Surviving in a foreign land with young children and without knowing the language takes some serious strength. I'm named after her. Whenever I'm feeling weak, I remember that I come from a lineage of badass, self-sufficient women. My grandfather did find his father. Apparently he was living in another part of town with another family. He never confronted him because he was afraid of what he'd do to the guy who abandoned him. Monsieur. TLDR, my great-grandfather was a piece of shit who walked out on his family after just emigrating to the USA.
5 years ago I moved in with my then-girlfriend. First time living with someone I dated and first relationship in a very long time. She turned out to be a nightmare. She had 2 boys, 4 and 5, and their father died of a drug overdose on their couch less than a year prior. I did not know this moving in, and the boys found him a year. She was also batshit crazy and was a pretty bad pillhead and smoked crack up until a few months before I met her. I moved in with her way too soon because I didn't feel like paying rent for my apartment when I was never there. Big mistake. I bought a truck from her parents and was making payments on it, and we put it in both of our names so I could go on her insurance. I used to leave for work at 4 a.m. and sometimes wouldn't be home until 9 to 10 p.m. hour plus drive, and by the time I'd get home she'd usually be plastered drunk, like a bottle of whiskey deep, and would just berate me the second I got home. If I said anything wrong to her, she would flip her shit and threaten to take my name off my truck title that she had from me, and report it stolen and shit like that. One day I had enough. I called my boss and told him I needed to GTFO of there and needed the day off. I waited until she left for work and moved all my stuff out to a friend's house in an RV he had on his property. Went to the DMV and filed for a lost title and got a new one just in my name. Got new insurance, changed my phone number, and rented a hotel room for 2 weeks far away from her but much closer to my job. I had a few thousand saved up and used almost all of it to get away from her. She never fucking saw it coming. Always told me I was too much of a pussy to actually do anything about how she treated me. Oh, and I never paid for the truck. Kind of a dick move to do to her parents, but at the time I needed to put as much space between her and I as possible. Oh yeah, and she told me she talked to her psychic. One of those bullshit phone psychics. And they told her to tell me to spend as much time with my mother as possible because I didn't have much time with her left. My mom had just found out she had terminal cancer and only about a year left to live if she was lucky. If I hadn't completely cut this psycho bitch out of my life, I was going to do something very stupid and likely spend a long time in prison. Only thing I feel bad about is ghosting on her 2 boys. They looked up to me as a father figure and adored me epically because their mom was horribly abusive to them this year. She would cuss at them like they were adults and would constantly brag about how her sister worked for Child Protective Services, so she knew how to abuse them without breaking the law. Things like using distilled vinegar to wash their mouths out instead of soap because it wasn't child abuse because it's technically a food product, or other crazy shit. Year of my life I regret, but it made me a lot more cautious about relationships. I am now engaged to the love of my life and have gotten sober, and my personal and family life is doing nothing but getting better every day. Still though, fuck that crazy cunt.
I still regret not being able to say goodbye to my sister 12 years ago. I said goodbye to my brother and my mum, but I was the only one who knew I would never come back. I moved 300 miles away. I have seen my brother and my mum twice since then. I haven't seen my sister since I put her down for her nap that day, before I knew I was leaving. After I left, my mum got married. My sister went to live with her grandparents. My brother chose to be homeless rather than let our mum drag him around different cities in the middle of a school year. I was able to finish school, which wouldn't have happened if I stayed. I stopped trying to accidentally walk in front of traffic or overdose on my prescriptions. Started eating food. Got basically blackmailed into seeing my mum after 6 years while my ex pretended we were together. I finally found a family that actually liked me. Met my boyfriend. Friends for 8 years. Together for 4. Got my own cat. Have my own apartment with bills paid early. Overall it has been great in between my mum popping into my life.
I moved out when I was 15. I was living with my mom, sister, and older brother. It was my older brother's house. His house was unlivable. The water was orange. There were fleas and ticks everywhere. And, because of his 11 cats, cats that kept reproducing because they were never spayed, neutered, there were piles of cat poop against the walls. On top of that, my mom was a textbook narcissist. Always going out and partying, passing out drunk, smoking pot and snorting coke, the works. She went to Myrtle Beach for a week. I mentioned it to my best friend, who invited me to stay at her place until my mom came back. Halfway through the week, her mom invited me to live with them a year. I said yes and stayed there until I left for the Navy 2.5 years later. I still talk to my parents sometimes, but it's an estranged relationship at best. I'm almost 23 and happily married, which I didn't even tell my family about until a year after. So I suppose it all worked out in the end.
My mother went to get a packin' dinner. She got pulled over. From what I understand, she kept moving her purse around and the cops searched it. She had coke and weed in it. I knew she smoked weed, but no clue she did coke. Ended up moving in with my father, divorced, an ugly one. While I was initially upset, I realized it was probably the best thing to happen to me. Moving in when my father allowed me to do so many different things. And I'm almost positive that if I didn't, I wouldn't have gone to college and started out a great career in IT. I really haven't talked to her since then.
Warning for everyone who's sensitive to suicide. I only know one story about this kind of thing, and it was my dad's best childhood friend. He was I don't know if you still call it that after that long, recovering drug addict. He was addicted to cocaine when he was in his teens to early 20s. 30-ish years ago, and back then lost a lot of money due to gambling and hookers. He got into a relationship with a woman back then who was supporting his bad habits and exploiting him for money. But he turned his life back around, left her, gave up his addiction, moved away for some time, found a wife, got a family. But the drugs and debt left a scar and he became depressed, which I didn't knew after he died. As long as I've known him, he was always a happy person. He and my dad have known each other since what Americans would call high school. My dad supported him in his worst times and vice versa. Apparently he sought counseling the last year and got better for a time, but went into a strong depression a few weeks before the incident. My dad told me that the drugs left a big dent in him and he heard voice telling him to do bad stuff for quite some time. But he told his wife it had stopped and even stopped going to counseling after getting better for like 5 days. His last day, he was at my dad's house. Before, he told his wife and daughter that he'd visit my dad. Wasn't too unregular action. They'd hang out quite often. And there he was as happy as always. They even made plans for the next day to go to a sauna when he left. But on his way home he just parked his car next to the road and jumped off a bridge onto a street below. They said it was probably planned beforehand and he just came over to say goodbye. I've only seen my father cry twice, but this one was the worst. He became completely unfunctional for a week, didn't go to work and stayed at home. His death affected my dad more than anything I've ever seen. I know this sounds cliché, but if you have any form of depression, seek help and don't let go of it. They tell you what drugs can do to you physically, but not what they might do to you mentally almost 20 years after you stopped with them a year. I have no idea what depression feels like and I can't imagine what it must be like when your own brain tries to kill you, hallucinating stuff, and I'm glad for it every day. But I know if someone came to me asking for help, I'd do anything in my power to help them this year. Because no one should have to go through that kind of stuff again. I don't really know anything about what depression feels like, but I know what it can do to everyone involved. So getting any help is better than letting it taking over. But saying that is probably harder than doing that. TLDR, my dad's best friend goes out to meet at my dad's place but killed himself on the way back.
Very late, but I do not know who my father is. He just left one day. I know his first and last name because I found it in a baby book when I was ~10~8 or so in. Committed it to memory. My mum has refused to tell me about him and so I have stopped asking. Crime records turn up nothing, nor do SORs. It makes discussions about family trees very awkward.
Thanks for watching. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel.